What does one woman's fight against breast cancer have to do with the beginning of the self-care movement? Dr. Sean Fitzpatrick is here to explain during this episode, but this isn't a history lesson. As the executive director of the Jung Center, he gave me and all of the family hope during the darkest times of COVID. He's done that for countless others in the Houston area. Dr. Fitzpatrick and I talk about how the pandemic continues to take a toll on the breast cancer community. You'll hear about the need for caregivers to embrace self-care. He encourages breast cancer patients to engage in self-acceptance and much more. Learn more about Dr. Fitzpatrick's work and the Jung Center by clicking on the link in our show notes. When you subscribe to our show, you help us grow. Someone you know may need to hear this story. So please share with your family and friends and consider supporting our mission. Your donation can help save the life of an uninsured woman. Let's talk about your breast, a different kind of podcast presented to you by The Rose, a breast center of excellence and a Texas treasure. You're going to hear frank discussions about tough topics, and you're going to learn why knowing about your breast could save your life. So, Sean, you're an accomplished photographer, you're an author, you're the executive of the Jung Center. But, you know, when I think about you, I think most often about you being the champion for people who are facing tough times.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And even though you've had an affiliation with the Rose for quite a while through Melanie, and she was our favorite person to find interns for us when she was with the University of Houston?
Yeah, she ran the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance.
Right. Oh, that was such a fun time. But what I appreciated about you most was during COVID. Do you know, I remember you started talking to us, and maybe I've got this wrong, but you were like in your garage.
That's right.
And you had lights on you, and you were trying to just help us. It was so important to me to know I could just turn you on and have that voice telling me we're going to get through this time and let's explore what we're feeling and let's don't stuff it down. And, so thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm so touched, Dorothy. And I'm so glad that was meaningful.
Oh, it was. It was. And continues to be with your other talks. In fact, you did one not too long ago, I think, where you were going through what it takes for us to get through times, about being present and, really paying attention, having people around us. Yeah. That support has become so important. Yeah.
And something that is not, when we, it's something that's become, in a sense, more difficult to access. So when I've been talking in different contexts for some time about the needs, about self-care, and about the needs of people who are doing work with those who are suffering, so who are touching human suffering in some way, whether those are healthcare professionals or social workers, psychotherapists, teachers, nurses, attorneys, and others. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I realized that the kind of luxuries we had about taking time to talk about the dimensions of self-care and so on, that they were, we just didn't have that time anymore. So many, particularly healthcare providers, were working really kind of superhuman hours and seeing much more human suffering than they had before. And so we've really kind of boiled it down, rather than having 5 dimensions of self-care and 3 questions you ask yourself over time, and that we didn't feel like we had the luxury for that. So we boiled it down to 3 simple steps. And the first is to just allow ourselves to be present. It is so difficult in this world to be in our bodies and to not have our attention anywhere but on our experience, like what's actually happening within us. Technology has just transformed our lives. We carry cell phones around with us, and we have computers, and we have all these devices talking to us and actually really demanding our attention. There's so many people forces in the world that want our attention so that they can monetize it, among other things.
True.
And so just being separated from those demands on our attention and being present with our actual experience is rare. I
Right.
find.
Now, take us through how we get in touch with our bodies.
Yeah. I think that infants, newborns, right, children have this instinctively, and over time we lose it. For us, it is a matter of, if we can do this anywhere. Just allow ourselves to notice 4 things that we're hearing in the environment. What are 3 or 4 things that I'm hearing? And even in a quiet space like the studio space, I can hear multiple things. I can hear just a little bit of noise from the team off camera, and I can hear the HVAC system quietly running in the background, and I kind of hear my own voice and your voice. And so those moments are say, what are 3 things I see? They bring us to this moment and out of our inboxes and the things we're imagining that are going to happen, or maybe the things we were doom scrolling on our our phone.
Right.
So it's not complicated. It's simple. It doesn't mean it's easy, but beginning with that, then we can begin to pay attention to what is actually happening in our bodies. So if the first step is to get present, the second step is really so that we can feel what we're feeling. And one way, we may be used to us talking about emotion, right? So, and kind of sort of comparing thought to emotion, or saying they're 2 different ways of, they're 2 different things. They're actually, Jonathan Haidt, who is a great psychologist who's up at, I think he's at NYU currently, talks about emotion and thinking is just 2 different kinds of cognition. So emotion is non-rational cognition, and thought is rational cognition. Well, so it's all valuable for us in navigating the world. But emotion is the label that we put on physical experiences that we have. So for instance, like I've spent my life struggling with anxiety and living with anxiety and learning from anxiety. And I don't feel anxiety. What I feel is my gut going, what I feel is sweat, or during the pandemic, I got a new manifestation of it, which is that my chest started to feel really tight. Because, of course, I was constantly checking to see, has the virus taken hold, Right. And so when we take that, when we're able to, when we have the space in our life, space in our schedule, maybe even physical space, to just bring our attention to what's happening in our bodies, it brings us out of the anxious states and into our natural systems that help us regulate our experience. So if we can begin to just feel what we're feeling, notice those sensations, like of the way that my feet feel on the floor right now. They're in my shoes, and the shoes are on the carpet, and the carpet, we're sitting on the first floor, and so the carpet is likely on some subflooring, and then the concrete, and then the earth, and I can feel the chair beneath, on the back of my thighs and my lower back, and then I can also start to pay attention to my breath and what my breath is doing. So we have natural systems that help us respond to change and threat in the environment. We call that our sympathetic nervous system. And so when that kicks on, our breathing becomes shallower, and our eyes dilate a little bit so we can let in more light. Our digestive system kind of shuts down, and our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure can go up. Those are all up below the level of our awareness and largely below the level of our control. Those things kick on as a way of helping us respond to crises. When we're paying attention to that, I think a lot of us, certainly I do, live in a state of perpetual, heightened arousal, particularly if you've struggled with anxiety a lot.
Right.
You're waiting for the next thing to go wrong, or the next thing you have to anticipate. But if I can do the simple act of just paying attention to what's happening in my body and notice, am I breathing shallowly, or am I breathing from my belly? That moment when I notice that I'm breathing shallowly and can actually have I have a little bit of control there, right? I can start to allow myself to breathe more deeply into my belly. Something really remarkable happens when I do that, which is that it activates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's allows us to come out of that state of heightened arousal and back into a state of equanimity and normal functioning, which for me means the end of my guts going, and the tightness and so on and so forth. So just allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling then makes it possible for us to maybe change our experience. Again, very simply through noticing how we're breathing and starting to change that.
It's almost too simple.
Yeah, well, and again, simple is not easy.
No, that's
Right.
true. That's true.
And I think there are a lot of forces that keep us in heightened states of arousal. Like we experience threats around us all the time, naturally. They may not be real in the way that others watching it would say, oh, that's a tiger clearly, clearly marching towards you, right? That doesn't matter. It's more about what our bodies perceive, like what's happening below the surface of our awareness. And if we've lived a life that has included a lot of threat, right? So those of us who've experienced trauma in our childhood or the course of our lives, it becomes more difficult because our bodies are really attuned to looking for threats in the environment. Yeah.
I'm always surprised when I'm doing yoga and my teacher says, put your shoulders down. Yeah. Because I go around like this all the time.
Right.
And that's what she was trying to explain to me. You've got to relax a little bit into this or you're not going to get the benefits of it.
But we're just automatically
like that.
Tense.
So tell me a little more about, you've been a psychotherapist for a long time.
Yeah, it would be, I guess, about 15 years since I graduated from UH Clear Lake, which is where I did my training as the clinical psychology degree. And it's just remained such a privilege, to do this work. And
then you've been at the Jung Center almost all your life.
Yeah. I started when I was, I started in 97. I don't remember how old I was then. 24, 25, something like that. And have been really privileged to kind of grow up professionally at the Jung Center. They had roles for me, and I am a psychotherapist. Professional. My role at the Jung Center is not to provide psychotherapy. My role is as an educator and as a leader, an administrator, and also I see clients. I have a small private practice, which has been a privilege and also really important, I think, for my experience of meaning and for my well-being in the world, because I get to do the work that you know well, which involves spreadsheets and talking and being a public face for the organization, talking to people, and but then I also get to have conversations of profound immediacy and intimacy with people about what really matters in our lives, and that is, it just, it fills my cup.
So this season, your spring session, is that what you call it?
A semester.
Yeah, semester. And the whole focus, as I was reading the brochure, was towards well-being.
Yeah.
And as I went down each of the topics, I went, what does it have to do with well-being? Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So tell us what, in your mind, is well-being.
So the very first thing I'm going to tell you is that you need to interrupt me at any point because I'll talk at length. I'll get on my soapbox and go.
No. we will stop you, but I just heard some things. As much as I think I know all this stuff, that I really hadn't paid attention to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, there are probably as many definitions of well-being as there are people. But I'll start with the definition that the American Psychological Association uses, and I'm paraphrasing. But what they say is that well-being is a state of happiness or contentment. And it's one that involves not experiencing low levels of distress and high levels of psychological and mental functioning, and having generally a good outlook on life. So if well-being is, I think, aspirational, like it's an experience that we want to have or a state that we want to be in, then self-care is one of the tools or one of the paths toward that, toward that experience of well-being. And, one way of thinking about well-being, I think, has to do with relationship. It has to do with, first of all, the relationship I have to my own experience. One of the things that in my psychological training, the tradition that I'm a part of, which is the Jungian psychological tradition, one of the insights has been that we actually are not, we imagine that we are singular, like I am me and nothing else. But actually, we are multiple, each of us. It's we are a community. There are different parts of ourselves. And neuroscience has borne this out in some really interesting ways. So David Eagleman, who is a relatively famous neuroscientist who was here in town for a long time and has left to Stanford, he talks about from a brain standpoint, from a neural standpoint, that we're actually like a team of rivals. Or an inner parliament. Like there's so many different voices within us, and they're jostling all the time to get control of the wheel, or the mic, my
how
mouth,
interesting. Yeah.
and they build coalitions, if we're thinking about well-being as a series of relationships, the first one is noticing noticing the community within myself, and having a relationship to those different parts of myself. And some of those parts may be I don't want to have a relationship with, right? And that's the tough work. There may be things that are, other people have told us are wrong, right? Or they may be impulses or desires we have that we're ashamed of. But all of the parts matter. They may not all be able to be expressed in the ways they want to be expressed, but all the parts matter because they're here to help us navigate through the world in a whole way and in a way that's connected to meaning. The second relationship then is for the relationship that we end up experiencing to others in our communities, right? Those kinds of relationships. Crucially, I think that's been the most impacted during the pandemic, right? So our ability to connect with other people is essential for our well-being, right? And at a time when we most needed support, we most needed the stability and care of others, we were cut off from it. So
what were some of the fallout from that? Do you think we're still in it?
Oh yeah, loneliness and isolation are their own pandemic, and the Surgeon General has done a wonderful job recently of spotlighting that. Saying this is the core threat to the mental well-being of our country is loneliness. And it really was exacerbated by the pandemic, both from the initial effects of the isolation that we imposed on ourselves to protect ourselves, but then from the patterns that emerged from that. Right, so we got out of the habit. Well, you can see it in some really material ways, right? So I love the movies, and the movie industry has been on the verge of falling apart over the course of the last 3 or 4 years because people don't go to theaters anymore. So and that's, I think, a symbol of the communal. The way it's affected our community across the board. We've gotten out of the habit. We've adapted to life without being in public spaces together and breathing the same air, which was so threatening for so long. But we've lost so much along the way. We believe that we can get some of those needs met in their fullness using Zoom, right, or using technology. And I am a huge fan of what these video technologies have allowed us to do, how they've allowed us to maintain connection and grow connection, but it's also cut out a huge part of what it means to be a human being in relationship.
So are we going to have a whole new field of psychology that has to do with living with Zoom for the rest of our life? I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said, I go from one meeting to the other. I used to have 15 minutes between, so I could even go to the restroom.
Yes.
Or we used to have a travel time
Yeah.
that
Right.
at least broke some of that constant
Yeah.
being in a meeting type thing.
Right. So it's interesting that you talk about the travel time. So to be here today, you drove a half an hour from our offices down in the museum district, and I love that time in a way that I didn't appreciate before the pandemic. You know, our word commute in its Latin roots means to change with. It's really about transforming. And in the most practical way, like when I leave my office, I'm a pretty introverted person. So spending my day in relationship with people and also sometimes in big groups with people, and as a therapist in maybe some real intensity with people, like at the end of the day, my energy is, my tank is empty.
I understand that.
and that time when I am not the director of the Jung Center or a therapist, and I'm not yet a dad and a husband, that time in the car ends up being really precious, you know? And we have lost that, right? That commuting time, that time to transform
Right.
from one social way of being to another social way of being, and to be in myself is, you know, something that we have lost a lot of because you're right. I can just go from one meeting to the next meeting.
next.
I have a client pop up on the screen after that, right? Yeah.
But, you know, something you just mentioned, I never thought about it, even that going from being the CEO
Yeah.
to being the wife or the husband, you know, if you walk through a door and that's the only time you have that chance to move from that, you don't move.
That's right. Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
Patrick always talks about you have that CEO voice. And then I go, what does that mean? And he says it's an entirely different level. And I realize what you're saying is because we don't transition from one to the other at all. Wow, I had not thought of that.
These small things that are simple and that really do change how we experience the world. When during the pandemic, I had the privilege of working with a lot of public health workers. So I worked closely with the leadership of the Harris County Public Health Department, and you could really see the cumulative effect of being in those roles that were acutely heightened over time on the public health workers' well-being, because it was them against the enormity of the virus, and in a system that had been wildly and systematically defunded for decades.
Yes.
Right prior to that there was nothing left but them, nothing left but them between us and much more mass loss than we had. But it was hard for them to then get out of the roles and that state of heightened arousal and attention that comes with it.
Right.
Right. And for some of them, I think it's still very much a work in progress, leaving that state.
So you touched upon loneliness. What do you think is our biggest issue today? Is it learning to communicate again? Is it readjusting to this new world? Is it?
You know, I probably, if you asked me this question at 10 minutes from now, I'd have a different answer tomorrow, so on and so forth.
Yes.
You know, in this moment, what I would say, and I want to circle back to the notion of self-care and its relationship with wellness. So self-care is something as I said, I spend a lot of time teaching about and showing up in different spaces, primarily with people who are in human service of some sort. And self-care is fascinating, and it has a connection. The origin of self-care has a direct connection to breast cancer and the lived experience of breast cancer. So it's a very new idea, not an experience. Of course, throughout human history, people have taken intentional steps to attend to their needs, right? That's not new. That's part of being human. But the concept of self-care itself comes from an extraordinary leader. She's not with us anymore. She died in the 90s. She was an extraordinary poet and teacher and activist, really an organizer on behalf of Black women. Her name was Audre Lorde. And so Audre Lorde was, in the 1980s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And as I say, she was a really influential writer, so not just her poetry, but also her essays. And she was working, she was faced with this decision, early 80s. She was a Black woman, single mother, uninsured, trying to make the difficult decision of whether she was going to just live out what life she had left, serving her values, which really was serving the needs of Black women and the consciousness raising work that she was doing, helping with women's groups that were forming in the 1970s and the 1980s. Whether she was going to live her life out according to serving those values, or if she was going to take the step back to seek treatment. And this is, again, in the early 1980s, and a difficult treatment path.
Yes, absolutely.
And as she was struggling with this, she wrote in her journal, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." Because she understood for herself, as a Black woman, that keeping her voice in the world, keeping her body in the world and her psyche in the world, her soul in the world, didn't just affect her children or her partner. It affected all of those people on whose behalf she was speaking and working. And so in order for those values that she had to continue to be served, for those people on whose behalf she was working to continue to be helped and to grow in strength and power, she needed to stay in the world. And so it was essential for her to pay attention to what her needs were. And I can and do, that's why I told you, stop me, because I'll talk for an hour about that sentence. What happened linguistically is that sentence in her journal then got circulated among the communities of activists and women who were inspired by her. And they recognized themselves in it because they recognized that they were spending so much time caring for other people and caring for the cause that they lost themselves, right? That there were divorces and there were addictions and there were heart attacks, right? And just exits from the work because it was overwhelming. Right. And over time, that passage got shortened to self-care.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what you're describing, I hear from our patients even now.
Do you?
Now, it has to do with, I put myself last. I was taking care of everybody in the household. Right. My husband was ill. My child was ill.
Right.
And all the time knowing that something was going on, so.
All the time knowing that something was going on with them. Something was wrong with them.
We hear that way too often.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of work to be done there.
And so much of it is social. Mm-hmm. So self-care, I think one of the stories that I take from that sentence that Audre Lorde wrote is that self-care emerged as a way of dealing with the failure of community to care for us. And so I am ambivalent about self-care. It is absolutely essential. We've lost the capacity, particularly caregivers, right? Mm-hmm. And women tend to be the caregivers.
Yes.
We've lost the capacity to attend to our own bodies and our own experience because other people need it more, because socially we've decided that other people are more important, right? And so and this gets back around to the notion of what we actually need right now. You were talking about loneliness. Mm-hmm. We were talking about loneliness, that there's a reason that we're lonely, and that is because the structures of recognizing and growing our understanding of our interdependence have been really eroded over time. So the answer to that, I think, in this moment is really recognizing it and beginning to address it by consciously reaching out for relationship, consciously working with others to create spaces where we do come together and talk about our experiences, where we can relax the one-sided way in which this culture expects us to be independent, and recognize that that is part of the story but not the whole of it, that fundamentally we are inextricably bound to each other.
Right.
And to your story, the woman with breast cancer who is the caregiver is making it possible for others to experience what they imagine is independence, right? When really what they're doing is dependent on that sacrifice of the caregiver, right?
Sean, we're going to have to close this up. Do you have one last word of wisdom? I think we're going to have you back. We've got to talk about community and what that means in our own self-care. But one last thought for our audience?
For your audience, I would just say that the journey, that for those who are experiencing a diagnosis and are moving through breast cancer diagnosis right now, I can't say enough, as I know you and your team do, that you have to pay attention to what your needs are right now. Right. And that may be the hardest work of all, is pushing back against those in your life who or just unconsciously have depended on you and expect you to be certain things. Right now, you are what's important, and that's important for the whole system. Right?
So true.
If you don't take care of yourself, the system will fall apart. So you have to preserve yourself, as Audre Lorde tells us.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Really my joy and my privilege, my pleasure. You are a hero to me and to this community, Dorothy. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for all the Rose represents in the world.
Oh, Sean, so sweet of you. All right, till next time.
Thank you for joining us today on Let's Talk About Your Breasts. This podcast is produced by Speak Podcasting and brought to you by The Rose. Visit therose.org to learn more about our organization. Subscribe to our podcast, share episodes with friends, and join the conversation on social media using hashtag Let's Talk About Your Breasts. We welcome your feedback and suggestions. Consider supporting The Rose. Your gift can make the difference to a person in need. And remember, self-care is not selfish. It's essential.